What made them angry?
Why do the Proud Boys exist? Why does the American Nazi Party exist? They hated black people.
There you go. There you go. That was the Welcome to the third edition of Historical Reflections with Jim Hern. It seems to me that believing that the genesis of white violence against black populations caused by Reconstruction and the KKK's reaction to the supposed maltreatment of whites by the military that was down there, the 200,000 you say that were left, rather conveniently ignores what occurred in the 246 years before that, when the institutional norms were chains, shackles, rapes, forced breeding, burning at the stake, and other acts that some of us consider to be violence against humanity. Isn't it possible that the attitude of whites towards blacks after the war was just a continuation of the habits they had before the war?
First of all, I agree with you in that crimes against humanity are morally, intellectually, ethically, and legally wrong. So let's not suggest that there was a difference in attitude towards slavery after the Civil War as opposed to before the Civil War.
That's my point. My
Right.
point is there was no difference.
Right, but there is a difference here because the years prior to the Civil War, go back to 1619 if you want to. The attitude and the minds of the people that lived in those eras were less aware of the situation, and the situation there was left ambiguous by the people who profited most by it. People in 1776 had a lot more to worry about and think about than whether or not slavery was an important enough issue to address when the country became new. And as a result of that, the ambiguity.
Let's not talk 1776. Let's talk 1787, when the Constitution was put together.
Okay.
Because that was the time. That was the time when the issue of slavery was thoroughly discussed, and the end result was the 3/5 clause,
right,
which said that people who weren't free should be counted for congressional purposes and electoral purposes as 3/5 of a person. So right. It was considered mightily in 1787.
It was considered mightily in 1787 by the people whose heritage was from the ruling class, whose heritage came from other ruling classes. And you can go all the way back to Roman times. You don't have to go back to 1619 to establish the discussion about whether slavery should or should not be put into the Constitution.
Well, there were plenty of references in the Bible with slaves. Lots of slaves in the Bible documented.
And the religiosity of the general population through 1787 may have justified slavery, or at least did not contribute to the hue and cry of the general public to have this issue solved. In short, they punted. They kicked it down the road. And we've heard that before. I don't believe they thought that would be an issue that lasted 90 years and took a war that killed 600,000 people to resolve. I don't believe that. But it did. We get now to the Civil War. And what happened in Reconstruction was that it institutionalized racism, anti-black feelings, and promoted on a on the basis of of society and by the way, because of society,
Hold on a
politicians.
second. I can't let that slide. You're telling me that racism was institutionalized by Reconstruction, and you're ignoring the fact that racism existed in America, where whites felt superior to blacks for 246 years prior to that. That's totally ignoring all the history prior to 1865 by saying that Reconstruction institutionalized racism. I'm just flabbergasted that you would believe that.
If you not only condone but make it legal to segregate people, to keep them in their place, and to own and operate an entire segment of the population, that's closer to genocide than what was going on in 1776, or would have gone on in 1776. And it had they had the foresight to simply say slavery is bad, we're not going to condone it in the United States, it would have ended. It ended before the Constitution in England. It didn't. It started up again, if you will. Slavery under a different form started up as a result of Reconstruction after the Civil War. I consider that to be more morally heinous than at any time prior to that, at least in terms of the history of this country.
You consider the fact that it was Reconstruction ended up having something more morally heinous than having people become property of other people. More morally heinous. Those are the words you just said.
Sure. A greater part of the population suffered than it did prior to that.
Okay, the slaves, they weren't suffering at all. They were just fine. And they only started suffering after Reconstruction. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that at all.
Okay, well, do you say they're more suffering after than before?
Right.
Did you say that?
Should we talk about sharecropping?
We can get into sharecropping, but I'm just trying to get my head around the fact that you think that it was better for people to be slaves than people to be free. I'm just trying to get my head around that.
I did not say it was better for people to be slaves than it was to be free at all whatsoever.
Well,
I suggest that the tyranny and the violence and the ugliness.
Hold on. Did you just not say that they were worse off than before?
I said the greater part of the population was worse off. It's a difference between institutionalizing genocide and the other immoral, unethical, and violent crimes that were committed, which continued after Reconstruction as well as before Reconstruction. I'm talking about a degree of the amount of injustice there was, which I think increased geometrically as a result of Reconstruction.
Reconstruction caused a amount of injustice that increased exponentially over the injustice of slavery.
Okay.
It's what you're saying.
If you're saying
it's what I'm hearing.
If you're saying what was would you rather be a slave or a sharecropper? Ask the sharecropper who was visited by the KKK.
Well, of course, the people who were slaves were going to be protected by their owners. And you're saying that because
I thought you said the slaves weren't protected by their owners.
Jim, if you were a slave owner and you had a healthy slave, you certainly would not want that slave who was doing work, who was making you money, be killed off by anyone or hurt or maimed or hold on, let me finish. You certainly wouldn't want that to happen, and allowing someone to come in and do harm would cause you economic harm. You wouldn't want that to happen. And you're saying that Reconstruction then caused the KKK to go in and make all this harm on these black people, which was way worse than their living as slaves. Am I hearing that right?
So you're suggesting it was better to be a slave than a free man?
I'm saying that that's what you're saying. That's what I'm saying. What it sounds like is your argument.
I think we've gone far afield here. I am not suggesting that being a slave or being a sharecropper are the equivalent. I'm saying that being a sharecropper, being the subject of segregation and racism, was morally and ethically a worse situation than being a slave in 1776.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It just boggles my mind that you're saying that would be worse than being a slave.
What you're misconstruing is that I'm talking about a policy. The fact that the proof of what I'm talking about is that it took another 90 years for us to overcome segregation and racism in the form of the Civil Rights Act of 1967. 90 years. It took 90 years to get the slaves freed. I can't comprehend how we can even debate about which is better, being a slave or being a sharecropper, any more than I could comprehend debating was it better to be a gypsy or a Jew in Nazi Germany. I guess that's where I'm coming from. I think we've beaten this one to death.
Yeah. Can you cite any examples of Reconstruction policy that you consider unfair treatment of whites in the former Confederate States?
One could argue, I'll give you one example. One could argue that Kentucky, who was a radical Republican state who did everything the Union asked and more, who embraced the altruism, who did what they could. Now, there are a number of reasons why that happened, but who continued to be lumped in with the other 9 Confederate states, suffered as a result of it, from the standpoint of funding, from the standpoint of taxes, from the standpoint of industry, from the standpoint of all the rest of the things that we denied the rest of the South. The people of Kentucky, white people and black people, by a certain perspective, suffered from it.
That's not the question. That's not the question. The question is, did you cite any examples of the policy where the treatment of whites in the former Confederate States was unfair? You said in Kentucky, white people and black people suffered under the lack of funding, et cetera. I'm saying the policy of Reconstruction where whites were treated unfairly. Do you know of any?
Well, outside of an outright no answer, which I am more than willing to advance here, the white people who sympathized were killed, destroyed, and moved on by the KKK and the rest of the South. If that qualifies as
so what was their beef, Jim? What was their beef if there was no policy that was unfairly treating them? What was the beef? Why start the KKK? Why go around burning crosses and lynching people?
Well,
if there was no unfair treatment.
Originally, it was put together to enforce the black codes.
Right.
Okay. And it was used on an institutional basis to drive former slaves back to the plantations. That was its original intent. The KKK disbanded in theory, or at least became less apparent as a result of the 14th Amendment, which settled the black codes issue. But the violence continued by the splinter groups and by the rest of the angry former Southern regulars.
Okay, why were they angry if there was no Reconstruction policy that made them angry? What made them angry?
Why do the Proud Boys exist? Why does the American Nazi Party exist? They hated black people.
There you go. There you go. That was the answer.
Oh,
They
okay.
hated black people.
I could have done that right away.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I was trying to answer a question.
Okay. What is your opinion of the theory that the failure of Reconstruction is that it ended too soon and it didn't do enough to ensure the rights of the former slaves, that the former slaves were protected? This is my theory. My theory is that instead of ending Reconstruction in 1876, they should have kept it going. They should have kept those federal troops down there until they had that society straightened out. That's my theory. What's your opinion about that theory?
Reconstruction ended in 1877. That's not my opinion. That's the formal.
After the election of 1876, that's correct.
Yeah, it ended because Rutherford B. Hayes needed one electoral vote to become president. He was a Republican. Republicans had lost a good deal of their majority. They got him the one electoral vote by agreeing.
Making a deal. They made a
deal. The deal included a statement, the statement that formalized the idea that the federal government would not interfere in the way the South ran their elections. The other part of that deal, interestingly enough, was they got a deal from the South that was now all back into the Union to build a railroad from the Atlantic through Texas. It was federally subsidized. It was given to the Union Pacific Railroad to build.
Okay, before we get into
wait. And the shares were sold first to congressional people.
Okay, before we get into the weeds about the railroads and the economics,
that's the only thing I'm going to say about railroads.
This is my question here. What is your opinion of my theory that Reconstruction ended too soon, and then if we would have kept those troops down there and forced the society of the South to embrace their new black citizens as full citizens, then we would have been better off had they done that. What's your opinion on that theory?
Okay. The reason the compromise actually worked was that the American public was bored with Reconstruction. They could care less about Reconstruction. It had been 12 years. And by that point in time, segregation and racism became so embedded in the American culture that there was no, according to the American public, there was no reason to take it any further. That was not going to happen. By what you said, yes, if we had burned New Orleans to the ground every third year as an anniversary, but
that's not what I said, buddy. Don't put those words in my mouth.
I'm not. I'm just saying.
Yes, you did.
I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, yes, if we had been harsher, as I suggested before, if we had enforced the laws as they were meant,
allowed black suffrage,
and enforce it. They allowed black suffrage, they just refused to enforce it. So, yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. Our senior year's high school varsity soccer team had a record of 11-1. This is my old style athletic bragging here. After the season ended, and as we were preparing for basketball, our coach told us, same coach, soccer coach and basketball coach, same coach, told us to get ready to lose more than we were used to. He was prophetic, and we had to accept a losing basketball record after a glorious soccer season. There was a certain maturity gained from that acceptance. The 2020 presidential election had a winner and a loser who did not have maturity to accept his defeat. Unfortunately for America, many of his followers were also unable to accept it, to the point that they now occupy a mindset immersed in delusion. This unwillingness to accept reality shows a lack of maturity, which way too often finds its expression through violence. We saw it on January 6th and in the century following the Civil War. Here is another reality that these crybabies refuse to accept. The changing demographics will soon put Europeans in the minority. Given what you witnessed in the white supremacist reaction to Reconstruction, Trump losing in 2020, the civil rights and Black Lives Matter movement, how do you see this emerging reality playing out? You're no longer an historian, Jim. You're someone who's looking into the future. How do you see it playing out?
The question in my mind boils down to this. How much have we progressed since 1967? 56 years ago. There's less transparency in government than even in Lincoln's time. The Freedmen's Bureau has become social service programs, and none of those has reduced crime one iota. Instead of punishment by occupation, instead of taking it out on the South, we have a small faction of our police force who kneel on people's necks. Instead of the KKK, we have the Proud Boys and the American Nazi Party, who are groups that are just as vicious and just as unreasonable as Nathan Bedford Forrest. I believe the true will of the people is being totally ignored. Whereas in Lincoln's time, right or wrong, the majority was catered to. These days, the system caters to the minority, the radical minorities, or the ones that are making the most noise. And let me finish. I've been waiting all week to do this. Let me finish with a quote from one of my favorite playwrights. At the end of this play that I'm thinking of, which was done in 1941, the main character of the play comes in front of the curtain, walks out, and looks directly at the audience. And he says something to the effect of, though the wolf of Germany is finally dead, the bitch that bore him is in heat again. That's my opinion.
Not good then.
Not good.
Okay.
Now I want to qualify that though. My personal belief is that the vast majority of people in this country are not stupid, are not immoral, are not unethical, but it appears that the majority, having lost its sway in Congress, is guilty by association. That's something that I think changes over time and only gets better. The problem with that, of course, is that it's been 256 years since this issue started, and it's taken an awful long time.
Well, we have to vote if that's going to be the case. If it's going to be better, we do.
Topic for another discussion, isn't it?
It sure is. Not one with you, though. All right, Jim. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed our discussion. And
Yeah.
as far as our heated debates go, we need to keep it up, man.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening to our third installment of Historical Reflections with Jim Hern. Until next time, bye now.
Ain't gonna let segregation